So thank you very much for doing this, Ben. For those of you watching the video later, this is part of a whole initiative to train new speakers. The goal was to increase the diversity of the speaker pool, although anybody can benefit from what we're trying to do. So if you're looking at this video, I would recommend that you go take a look at what else is in the library and see if there's something there that could help you run your event, submit a session, just become a better speaker if you're already experienced. So this particular session, how to host a successful panel, came about because I run panels at SQL Saturdays, Data Saturdays, regular conferences frequently. And I often have organizers reach out to me to ask if I can organize one for them. And sometimes even if I'm not at the event, they have me organize them. As we move through this, keep in mind that we are currently in a virtual world, but almost all of these rules still apply. This still works for when you're running a virtual panel versus in person. Some tasks do get a little bit harder in a virtual world just because of the way microphones work and speaking over each other and things like that. But otherwise, everything is just about going to be the same, so keep that in mind as we go. I am Rie Merritt. I am a senior program manager in the Azure Data segment of Microsoft. I was Data Platform MVP, and I am now the PG lead for the Data Platform MVPs. I run with Buck Woody, the Azure Data community, which is currently, I think, 136 user groups with about 74,000 members. We're really proud of that community-owned, Microsoft-empowered initiative. I've been very active with Women in Tech for years, and I help run the Atlanta Azure Data user group. So let's get straight to what we're going to cover today. So there's some things that you need to do for the event, okay? And that is going to be select the topic, write and submit your abstract, identify your talking points, select your panelists, create a pool of questions, and communicate with your panelists. So a lot of things fall into that first slide, right? So we want to talk about all about the what. What do you want this panel to be? And there's some decisions that you have to make before you do anything else, before you come up with the title, before you write the abstract or whatever. There are lots of options on the type of panel that you want to submit, and this process works well to build content for any of them. If you didn't want this to just be a regular discussion panel, David Klee runs a great session on horror stories, on tech horror stories. And he usually runs this in the last slot of the day of a conference, and he calls it a place filler. So when all of the other sessions that day have exploded your brain, but you don't want to leave early, you go to this session, and there's always enough data professionals who sit there and talk about, hey, here's what's went wrong, here's how I fix this, and then I guess the next person tries to see if they can top that. You do have to talk about, you have to figure out that type of panel. So Women in Tech panel, is it going to be a diversity inclusion panel, just general career in tech and ask the experts? You have to decide that first. And so once you have that nailed down, you have to ask yourself, what role do I want to play in this panel? Do I want to moderate or do I want to serve as a panelist? Now, this differentiation is tricky, but it's really, really important. So while you can contribute to the narrative as a moderator, it is best to keep your assertions to a minimum and let the panelists shine. So if you want to be on the panel, if you think there are points on this topic that you really, really want to get across, you need to figure out a format that will work for you to serve on the panel, or you need to choose another moderator to do that. So if this is going to be a Woman in Tech panel, Decide what aspect of that you want to cover. Do you want to talk about the wage gap and salary negotiations? And let women on the panel talk about what's worked for them, what didn't work for them, things like that. And keep in mind that wage gap salary negotiation conversation may change based on where you are in the globe, where you are in the United States, what your region is, what your state laws are, that kind of thing. So keep that in mind. Would you want to talk about navigating office politics as a woman? Would you want to talk about career trajectory? And I hate to use this phrase here, but sometimes with the panel, you need to think outside the box. Monica Rathbun does a great session on the proper care and feeding of your network administrators and how you can work together. And that's actually something that I think would make a great panel discussion. So either put professionals, DBAs up there, or even network admins up there, and let them talk about how to communicate with each other, what works, what is it that the network admin needs from the DBA, what does the DBA need to know to get what they want from the network administrator. Her advice is beer and food a lot, but I still think that it would make a great panel discussion. Now, we have to talk about the who, right? Who's going to serve on your panel? So if you're going to select panelists, if you already know who they're going to be, list them in the abstract by name. If you're selecting them from the type of speakers that are chosen later, then describe the type of panelist that you'll be discussing. But before you include someone in your abstract, get their permission. Don't just assume they're going to do a panel with you on anything. Don't just assume that some woman speaker is going to want to be part of your WIP panel. Don't assume some MVP in attendance will feel comfortable serving on your Ask the Experts panel. In both of those cases, it could be that the speaker has no intentions of staying all day at the conference, but they also could have other responsibilities during the day. So if they work for a sponsor, they may have to be at a table. It's possible that they could be presenting a sponsor session that doesn't go through the normal submission process so that you wouldn't see it. If they're a consultant, they could be there and really, really want to network versus sit on a panel. So get their permission before you include them. And instead of just assuming. I would love to think that that should be obvious, but it's not. So let's talk about the pool of questions that you're going to create. I mentioned this on a different slide, but your panel and the discussion, just like a regular session, should be a journey. There are some points that you're going to want to cover during this panel, some different aspects of whatever your topic is that you're really, really going to want to make sure that you get in there. So prioritize all of those points and then turn those into questions. My advice is that you create more sessions than you're going to need, but expect that you may not get to all of them. And that's okay. I guess it's better to be over-prepared. So you have your panelists and you have your questions. Now you need to communicate all of that to your panelists. So provide them with a list of questions ahead of time. Ask for their feedback. Do you think these are good questions? Are there any that you think I should ask? Ask them to claim a question. Sometimes there's going to be a question on there that one of your panelists says, I have a great example of how this works or how this doesn't work, or I have great experience with this, depending on the type of panel, of course. Let them claim that one and then add that to your notes, because you're going to want to go to them for that question. We're going to get to during the event here in just a second. So if you're having trouble coming up with all the questions that you want to ask, reach out to your network. Ask If it's a career panel, ask them, hey, what's some advice that you wish you'd been given early in your career? So that you can form that into a question to make sure that it gets discussed as part of your panel. It's just like any kind of project you're running, a diverse group solves problems better. In this particular case, groups and different people contributing to this will help you cover aspects of whatever the problem you're trying to describe or solve or anything will be. So crowdsource those questions, if you will. You could even tweet about it ahead of time and say, hey, what question, these are the people that are on my panel, what question is it you'd want to ask? And so you make sure that you add that to the list is a really, really good, idea to get some additional ideas in there. So we talked about everything that you need to do ahead of time. These are some things that you need to do during the event, like while you're running the panel. So you're on the schedule, you've got your speakers, they all have questions ahead of time so they know what's coming. You've told those panelists, here's how I'm going to run this. This is what the format's going to feel like. Everything, you make sure that they are comfortable with what's coming so that everybody understands their role. So you're now in the room, you've got 3 to 4 people on the stage with you. I don't recommend more than that, depending on the length of the session, because you're going to want to make sure that you can get to all of them. And give them a few minutes to touch on any point. So now that you have your agenda and you've laid your agenda out to your speakers ahead of time, now you're going to want to tell your audience what's coming. Here's how the format is going to work. We are going to round robin questions. I have a list of them here. Let them know if you're going to take questions from the audience at any point. Let them know if you're going to let them be part of the discussion to give some back and forth. If you're going to take questions from the audience, let them know how they can do that. If it's a large enough room, there'd be a standing mic, right? If it's a small room, just have them raise their hand. It is my advice that you instruct them to not just blurt something out. In that particular case, you kind of lose control of the narrative, and it's really important that you set those expectations early. So you've now laid out your audience. You laid out your agenda to your audience. You've let them know what's coming. Introduce yourself and let them know why you're doing this. Have your panelists introduce themselves quickly. Everybody should be able to introduce themselves in 30 to 60 seconds. I don't need your full resume. I just need you to communicate to the audience why you're on this panel, like what makes you worth listening to. So you should be able to do that in 30 to 60 seconds. And then ask your questions. Read the question out loud. We're going to go to you first, Ben, Johan, something, and you tell them the question. Let your panelists know that they can then add on to that if they want. So if you have 3 to 4 people, you're going to go to person 1, then you're going to say, okay, do you want to add anything here, person 2? Depending on the length of their answers, you may want to, if they took a really long time to answer those, you may want to jump to question 2 and then go to person 3 and then go to person 4. If you're going to take questions from the audience, I think it's a good idea to hold, if you have prepared questions, it's a good idea to hold those questions at the end, save some time at the end to let them do that. You would already have let the audience know how that's going to work. If you're the moderator, if somebody has gestured that they have a point they want to make, during the discussion, make a note of who that was so you can circle back to them if you want to. And I literally mean make a note, like right. If you don't think you can remember it, because there's a lot going on moderating a panel, literally write it down. What row they were on, if you know who they are, red t-shirt, whatever's going to help you remember to go back to them And if you have to jot down what the discussion point was, to kind of help, you're going to point to them, you're going to call on them. If it's online, you're going to know their name. You had a comment that you wanted to add here, or did you have a question about their point? Let's see. So be ready to pivot. There are going to be times where the panel isn't going the way that you want it to. There's not going to be as many people in the audience that are going to be able to give you back and forth. You know, if it's a panel of 4 people and there are 4 people in the audience, it's going to feel a little awkward. In that particular case, it's okay to turn it into a conversation versus a more formal Q&A kind of thing. If you're not getting the kind of answers you want out of your panelists, it's okay to change how you ask them the question and lead them a little bit. Lead them down the point of your question, what it was that you established before you even wrote your abstract of what you wanted to cover. Part of being ready to pivot is dealing with that panelist who isn't contributing much. Some people are nervous. Maybe you learn you don't want to ask them to sit on a panel again, or maybe you want to talk to them about how to serve on a panel and what their role is and how they need to be a little bit more interactive. But feel free to call on them directly, or say to them when you're asking question or asking a question of person 1, it's okay to say, Julie, we're going to come to you next. That gives them a moment to kind of prepare themselves for what they're going to say. If it turns out that they're that kind of panelist, right? That they're nervous or that they need more time to kind of get their mental feet under them, preparing for an answer. So be ready to pivot, be ready to draw in that silent panelist. On the reverse side of that, sometimes you end up with a panel where one person is literally sucking all the oxygen out of the room, right? We've all been in a room watching a panel where one person out of 4 is talking 50% of the time. Don't blame the panelists. They have a lot to say. They were asked to be on the panel. Blame the moderator, right? It's that moderator's job to find a break point in what they're saying. You know, thanks, you know, I'll use the name Julie again, but thanks, Julie, but we're going to go to Kate, or we're going to go to Ben at this point. It's your job to make sure that everybody in the panel gets their voice heard. It would be appropriate for you to take notes ahead of time on your panelists. If it's a career talk, it would be appropriate for you to have taken notes ahead of time about different aspects of somebody's career, so that helps you pivot away from that attention hog, right? Julie, you have experience at X. You did this for this company or whatever. Can you tell us about that? That again helps you focus on somebody else and away from the attention hog. And hopefully your attention hog picks up on that, that you're doing that. If it were in a virtual world, it would be maybe you could send them a Teams chat that says, we're tired of hearing from you. Nicely, like say it nicely. But I get that. And then finally, it's really, really important to avoid that rabbit hole. That's where your agenda and your discussion points come in handy. Keep up as you go with how much time you're spending on each topic, how much time you have left. And if you've spent too much time on something, even if somebody in the audience wants to keep discussing it, it's okay to say, we have a lot of things that we need to get to. Happy to talk to you after the session about this. Send me an email, hit me up on Twitter, whatever. That kind of draws a line on the floor, right? To say, okay, we're ending this one. We've gotten a little off track. It's even okay to say, wow, we've gotten off track here. Let's move on to the next question. we can circle back to this if we have time. And then you go on to the next one. So that's how you get out of a rabbit hole. It's really important to notice when you're going down the rabbit hole. As you're moderating these sessions, you have to read the room, you have to read the panelists, you have to keep focused on that agenda, on the questions that you've set up ahead of time. You will probably identify early the person in the audience that is going to be the one who does this. And sometimes it baffles me, but sometimes somebody will try to draw you down a rabbit hole that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. In that particular case, it is completely acceptable to say that's actually not what this panel is about today. That's probably a different panel. And then pivot, change the subject completely, draw the attention away from them. So that's the last point. I didn't put it on the slide. I should fix the slide. To say at the end, wrap everything up. Thank your panelists for taking time out of their day. Thank the audience for their participation and for their attending. And then just kind of, just like in school when you were writing a research paper, or, the 3 paragraphs, something you have to tell us what you're going to tell us, and then tell us what you told us. You have to do the same thing here. So you laid out your agenda at the beginning. You should have a couple of statements prepped as a wrap up. So you're thanking everybody. This is what we wanted to talk about today. We accomplished that. Let's continue the conversation on LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that. And then you say, thank you so much. And then you stand there and you wait for everybody to clap gracefully, graciously. And then you're all done.